video if I can get it going. So I'd much rather be talking to you and standing in a field somewhere than and in person than actually by video link. But there we go. My name's John. I am a recovering arable farmer. After nearly 50 years, it's been more than 400 days since my last harvest. And we've now sold the combine and bought a 360-degree track digger. In the absence of woolly mammoths, thought it was the best thing to do. And actually, I having great fun with it on the farm. Right, we'll just go on to the next slide if I can. So Alistair Driver last week talked about growing up as a feral child in the Cotswolds. I can kind of relate to that. I was a feral child in Suffolk. I took over the farm when I was 18, family situation really, and I won't go into the details of that. I thought it's actually quite interesting looking at these photos that my parents are much more worried about me falling into a pond when I was pond dipping than they were actually me driving a tractor, which is kind of a bit strange really when you think about it. But anyway, there you go. The farm is actually steeped in history. We have several ancient monuments. We have South Elmer Minster, you can see in the bottom left, the moated site and the hall and the gatehouse, and we've got medieval fish ponds, and actually the core of the farm was a medieval deer park. It dates probably from the 12th century. It belonged to the bishops of Norwich for about 500 years, so till the dissolution. And Edward II hunted here in 1326. So we've got a lot of history, and history has been sort of part of my life. Conservation of the built environment and the natural environment has been sort of right at the heart of my farming career. But also I've been involved in stewardship for a long time. First agreement was in 1991, and we've gone on, you know, throughout. Alistair Driver talked about shifting baselines last week. I don't have records, but I have family memories. When my parents were first married, they talked about standing in the garden on a summer's evening and listening to nightingales. I've never heard a nightingale on the farm. When I started farming, I suppose mid-1970s, I remember I was trying to get some barley, and it was a difficult spring. And probably getting a bit late, and the old boys were sort of standing around looking and saying, cuckoo barley will never be a good boy. I drilled my barley late. I really don't remember actually at all how good it was or anything. What I do remember is the constant sound of cuckoos all summer seemed to be haunting me wherever I went on the farm. Very rarely hear a cuckoo now. So in stewardship, we've been involved in planting lots of hedgerows and trees and so on, but more interestingly, actually, since 2016, we've been working with a small group of other East Anglian farmers in what was initially an EU-funded Natural England project, looking at winter bird food and pollen and nectar, and this then morphed into the ELMS test and trials. Essentially, we were sharing knowledge, going around each other's farms and trying to be better at farming for nature, and working with the Natural England advisors, who have now, some of which become good friends, and working with DEFRA and even social scientists. And in the bottom slide there in the middle, we got involved in counting seed heads in winter bird food and counting species in pollen and nectar mixes. I actually found I was actually enjoying that more than the actual farming. And so when our stewardship came to an end in 2021, that's when we had that last harvest picture, my employee Dennis, who was on the combine there, was actually been working on the farm since he was 17. He's now set to retire this year. So we thought we'd got to actually change what we were doing. I've got no pressure from another generation. Neither of my sons are interested in farming. So we saw an opportunity. We spent a couple of days down at NEP, first one on the organised landowners tour. It was actually really interesting, and Charlie Burrell was really generous with his time, and also sort of gave us a lot of information. Also wandered around Argothen and spent a day with the Blackbourne Valley with Will. So we sort of spent a lot of time sort of thinking about where we were going and what we were doing. So the farm is about 450 acres, 180 hectares, and we've put the bulk of it into what they call restoration of wood pasture in Stewardship. We've got lots of these maps which tell us what we should be doing according to the plan. I'm not sure that's exactly what's going to happen. I think things have changed as we're going on. It's a sort of very dynamic process. But one of the main things we're doing is actually restoring or putting in the line of the old deer park boundary. So you can see those pink dots, which is where the deer park boundary was, and then it follows round and it's formed as sort of elliptical shape. It never occurred to me. I've lived in this landscape all my life and worked in it, and it never occurred to me why they were shaped like that. And it was so that the deer didn't get stuck in corners. I find that fascinating. We've got to actually talk. Matt was talking earlier a few moments ago about Chinese water deer. We've got an awful lot of Chinese water deer on the farm, and the part of the project, when you see the slide later on, is we're putting a boundary fence right the way around the whole of the farm. And one of the things we've discovered actually is I think they're going to learn where the gaps are, but we're quite worried because we haven't got the curved boundary, so that they do tend to get sort of caught up in it a little bit. Not actually caught up, but they do. You can see where they've been sort of tramping around trying to find the gaps. But as I say, we're living and learning. Fields outside the boundary of what the deer park that have got numbers in, we're putting those continue those with pollen and nectar and winter bird food, and then we've got some other fields which will be sort of species rich grassland, and the idea is that we'll have sort of management fields where we can take the bull out and park him somewhere where he's not wanted, with some other cows to keep him happy, of course. Then we've got other fields, as say, with pollen and nectar, and that will sort of feed into the whole project area of the main farm. So our experience the first year has been it's really interesting, actually. We drilled some of it with grass, and some of it we've just left for natural regen, and then other areas we've drilled with a mixture of wildflowers and grass. There was, because of the year that we had last year, there was virtually nothing came up in the wildflower mix until it rained, and it didn't rain until September, did it? So that was a little bit. It was a bit of a desert. But what we have been getting on with, and actually that's one of the most exciting parts of it, is the restoring the ghost ponds. Ghost ponds are essentially they're ponds that have been filled in over the years of 50, 60 years and more of traditional farming, and it was the way to go. As you were also encouraged to do it. But what we've, with some funding from the Suffolk Wildlife Trust through actually Highways England, we've got the funding to dig out the ponds. So we've doubled the ponds on the farm from sort of basic sort of 15, 16 to over 30. And that's been a really exciting project. That's not our digger there, that's actually the contractors who came to do that. And we're going to dig some more in 2023. These are going to be new ponds altogether. So the other thing which has been really interesting is that the areas of natural regen are actually where the wildlife is. So it looks fairly unprepossessing stubble, but and there's not really much in the way of interesting flora there, but it's where the birds have come in, and actually also the roe deer and the Chinese water deer and the hares. And so we've had flocks of finches and loads and loads of skylarks. I suppose it's just because it was undisturbed, but the skylarks are phenomenal. Actually, it's been really, really encouraging. And I suppose it's just leaving nature to go on with it itself. I showed the slide of the map with the tree planting, and I'm not really sure whether we're going to plant all those trees. What we might do, and sort of this will depend on how things go, we will be sort of planting our own acorns and encouraging natural regen as far as possible. I think that might be a better way forward, but I think that time will tell us. We will be planting the deer park boundary, because I think that's quite important. But other than that, I think it's really a case of letting things take their course. The cattle we've always had. I've always had cattle on the farm. I've changed the breed, so we've now got mostly Sussex. They're nice, quiet, sort of gentle, and they tend to sort of look after themselves as much as possible. I've got one British white. She's there in the foreground. She's really useful, actually, because it's amazing how the Sussex sort of blend into the background, and at a distance you can hardly see where they are, particularly in the half light when you go out to just check them. And so having a British white is really handy, because you can see her from quite a long way off. And so that's been something which, again, I didn't expect. But there you go. So we're now starting to see the results of our efforts, I suppose. That pond in the centre, actually, that was taken not long ago in the frost. That was a pond I was pond dipping in as a child. So we've restored that, and we've actually got great-crested newts back in there, and so we're hoping that they will then sort of migrate to the other ponds we're digging, and the pond in the bottom centre is the one where you saw the digger at work. So other than that, we've been, as I say, continuing with our pollen, nectar, and the wild bird food. We sort of got fairly good at that, particularly through the trials we've been doing. And that was one of the areas of species-rich grassland where the arable, what we considered arable weeds, I suppose, we'd allowed to come back, and that's been fairly spectacular. I've not got a problem with foxes on the farm at all. What I mean is that there's plenty of foxes. We've got a good population of them. I'm quite happy to see them. Maybe they'll actually sort of balance out the number of rabbits we've got on the farm, and actually maybe eat some of those other introduced species like the pheasants. So going on from that, we're seeing the results now, particularly the ghost ponds. So the water has started to come back in, and you've got this seed bank of aquatic plants which start to appear, which have been buried for maybe, say, 50 or 60 years, which is great. And actually what was really encouraging is, there was just a little puddle of water in one of these ponds, and I went to have a look at it, and there were dragonflies laying eggs in it immediately, and now there are other invertebrates in there. So we're really hoping that that will actually bring a real sort of flood of biodiversity back to the farm. And the other thing you get, which is pretty amazing, is these orchids keep popping up. The bee orchids sort of appear on what was arable land for years, which is pretty amazing. It's slightly different with the green-winged orchid there. That was brought in with some green hay from the Winks Meadow, actually, which is just up the road from us. I was a volunteer warden for Winks for years, and Suffolk Wildlife Trust helped us with bringing in some green hay, and that's about 10 years ago. And now there's I think Nicole, my wife, counted about 60 green wing plants the other spring. So we're actually going to manage that a little bit differently, and then try and spread some of that green hay from there around the farm too, to sort of encourage the flora. So there we are. It's been an interesting time. I think nature is really important to all of us. I think it's the sounds of the wild are sort of embedded deep in our human evolutionary psyche, certainly mine. And it's probably saved me hours of therapy, being able to sit under a tree and actually just think about it. One of my farming neighbours, who's slightly appalled at what I'm doing, is actually a relation, and he said to me, he said, "Your father will be turning in your grave if you do what you were doing." I'm not sure about that at all. I think he might actually be really encouraging. He loved his nature as much as I do, and I've got no illusions. We're not going to save any species, but maybe we might continue to hear the turtle dove for a little bit longer, and maybe we'll hear a cuckoo again, and who knows, might even hear a nightingale. It's an interesting time, and hopefully things will continue to improve. So that's just about me. I could rattle on a lot longer, but I'll hand you back.
Genevieve Broad, are you doing regular monitoring of species coming back into the farm?
Particularly on the ponds, we've been working with Professor Carl Sayre from UCL, and so we'll be monitoring the ponds on that side. We've got Dorothy Casey coming in to look at the flora, sort of sharing her wealth of knowledge on that. But we are also on the birds, actually, with Suffolk Wildlife Trust, the Suffolk Bird Club. We've got a volunteer coming to do bird surveys. I think actually baseline surveys are really important, because it'll sort of inform us sort of decisions going forward. So if there's anybody out there who wants to come and do sort of invertebrate surveys and things like that, be very glad to talk to them. I think it is an important part of what we're doing, to know what's going on. And actually, it's one of the things we're hoping to do. If we can get maybe lottery funding or something like that, we'll look at a field study centre, because working with academics and actually volunteers, actually, I find really interesting. So,
Adam Gretton, your last comments reminded me of English Pastoral by James Reed Banks. Those family, cultural aspects of rewilding are vital, in my view. You mentioned natural regan of trees. Do you have increasing areas of scrub?
Yeah, that's one of the areas we're looking at. I should have sort of mentioned that, actually. One of the things we realised is that we're going to have to exclude the grazing cattle from areas in order to encourage the particularly scrub regen. So we sort of envisaged putting just a fence around the outside, but actually already we started putting internal fences back in some areas to keep the cattle out for a while, so we can see what comes. And scrub is going to be a really important part of that, I think.
Pete Fox, that was really interesting. Would you be happy to speak to other Suffolk farmers about your work?
We have been. We took a couple of parties round last summer. I think the Blythe cluster group came around, and we're also, which is another exciting thing that's cropped up just literally in the last couple of months. We've been now just joined an extended Waveney cluster group, and so I think there is talk of them coming around and having a look too. So yes, is the answer to that.
Brilliant.
Neil Armachelu, John, great to see this happening in the Saints with its fantastic comments. What are your objectives, targeted, or suck it and see, or both, and what monitoring is being carried out?
Well, I've already talked about monitoring. I suppose we'll part of the sort of sell in terms of the project from DEFRA was to look at turtle doves particularly. We've been working with the RSPB for quite a few years on that, and so we're looking to sort of put food out during the summer months for turtle doves. And also, I think things like water voles we're interested in trying to work towards. But to a certain extent is to see what comes. I think one of the experiences of NEP was that actually things turned up they weren't expecting, like purple emperors. It wasn't the sort of classic habitat for them. So I think sometimes actually nature does the unexpected, and you've got to go with it, really.
Yeah.
Catherine say, how have farmers in your local area and other members of your local community reacted? I know you mentioned one negative reaction. Have others been more open-minded?
Generally, people are actually much more positive about it. I've had a lot of farmers actually quite intrigued and actually very interested in what we're doing. So it's not all negative by any means. In fact, actually, there's a few and far between, and that's the sort of ones you remember. But in terms of the local community, everybody's been very, very positive, actually, and very encouraging. So that's really good.
Well,
Paul Clark, how do you manage public access? Do you have public footpaths, offer guided educational tours? Do you expect tourism visitors' education to generate more income in the coming years?
We're not really big enough to accommodate large numbers of people, I suppose, but we do have the public footpath system, and we've always had access to the Minster particularly, so that will continue. Whether I'm not sure about educational tours. We're always interested in taking interested people around, and I actually enjoy that aspect of it, but not sure we're going to be setting up a visitor centre as such.
Sue Hooton, Suffolk Bat Group would be happy to carry out a survey this summer for you if you don't have a baseline yet.
No, we have done some bats when we've done building work. We've done some bat surveys, and we've got serentines and various other not naturals. We've got some quite interesting bat species anyway. But I'm not particularly well up on bats, but yeah. Hello, Sue. Good to hear from you.